In this video, we'll be going over the best common magic items, which is the lowest rarity of magic items in the game. A rarity that makes them pretty easy to get a hold of in most campaigns, and is usually regulated to the more useless or favorable items. And at number 10, we have the Orb of Shielding. This item is available from Eberron Rising from the Last War, and it has the ability where it can be used as a spellcasting focus. That isn't super unique, as most spellcasters start off with a spellcasting focus, but there are different variations of this orb, and depending on which one you have, you can activate its second effect, where, as long as you're holding the orb, you can use your reaction to reduce the damage of a spell by 1d4. For example, if your orb is made of Fernian basalt, then you can use a reaction to reduce fire damage by 1d4, and etc, etc. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of materials the orb can be made of, which allow you to potentially reduce the damage of a specific type by 1d4. And two of the types you can choose allow you to reduce the damage of two different types, as the Kytherian Skarn works on acid and poison damage, and the Laminian Flint works on both lightning and thunder damage. Now, here's what's good about this item. Generally, common items are kind of useless, like the Cloak of Billowing, which basically just allows your cloak to look like it's blowing in the wind, and allows you to have a dramatic Superman pose. That's the type of power level we're looking at when it comes to common magic items. They're not really supposed to be super useful and more flavorful things. So for this item to allow you to take less damage from a type of magic damage is pretty good, especially since there's no limitation on how often you can use this. As long as your reaction is available, you have the potential to just always use the item to take less fire damage, or whatever the other type of damage you happen to have with the orb associated to. And fire damage is common enough, where that would be a pretty good one to choose if you had the availability of choosing whichever orb you wanted, or depending on whatever campaign you're running. So being able to reduce the damage of a type by 1d4 is pretty valuable, and is kind of strong considering the power level of common magic items, made even better by the fact there's no limit to the amount of times you can use it. Now, a little something you'll probably notice as we go through this video, mainly all the useful magic items come from Eberron or Xanathar's Guide to Everything. There's very few useful common magic items from the default Dungeons Master Guide. And at number 9, we have the Feather Token, another common item from Eberron Rising from the Last War. This item is kind of like a consumable, in that it can only be used once, and activates automatically. As when you fall at least 20 feet while you have this Feather Token on you somewhere, it will automatically activate so that you take no fall damage, and descend at a comfortable 60 feet per round. Then once you land, the Feather Token becomes a non-magical item and can't be used again. And since the Feather Token doesn't require an action to do anything, it's honestly just a really nice item to have on your character if you can get one. Because fall damage can unexpectedly kill a lot of players, and you can never really plan for a fall most of the time. So the fact that it doesn't require any action on your part is one of the best parts about the item. There are so few items and abilities in the game that happen automatically like this. It's basically like a deployable parachute in a sense, except better since it can be used on smaller falls as well, and doesn't require you to pull any ripcord. Very useful item, even useful to high-level players, which is why it easily makes this list. And at number 8, we have the Pot of Awakening from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is another consumable item like the Feather Token, where if you plant an ordinary shrub into this clay pot, and then let it grow for 30 days, the shrub will then magically transform into an awakened shrub at the end of the 30 days. After which its roots break the pot and destroy it so you can't use it again. And the creature which awakens from this pot is automatically friendly towards you, and unless you give it a command it will just sit there and do nothing. Now, an awakened shrub is a CR0 creature, who is technically able to deal damage, but only deals around 1 damage on average with its attack. That only has a +1 to its modifier, so that's not really the main purpose of the awakened shrub. The shrub can move around, and can even take a few hits before going down, as it has 10 health, and is able to speak the language of its creator. And since the shrub has the false appearance trait, where it looks exactly like a normal shrub when it remains still, it could be used as a scouting tool in areas where foliage is plentiful, or just in some buildings that have normal potted plants around. And if you manage to get a whole bunch of Pot of Awakenings, then you could potentially have an army of little creatures who all have a chance to attack. Basically, this item gives you a pet, and you can have all the benefits of a companion from the Find Familiar spell. Well, the non-magical benefits, like being able to provide the help action in combat, and being able to scout things out, kind of. Being able to summon a creature at all with a common magic item is pretty good, and the Awakened Shrub is not a half-bad creature that can be summoned with such a low-tier magic item, which is why it makes this list. Now, whether it's more useful than the Feather Token, or the Orb of Shielding is kinda debatable, but there are a lot of uses in combat that an extra companion provides. And also, if you're creative, having a loyal plant which looks exactly like a normal plant can come in quite handy. And at number 7, we have the Perfume of Bewitching from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is another consumable item and is basically a magical perfume vial that only has enough for one use. And if you use an action to apply this perfume to yourself, you'll obtain a buff for 1 hour that basically gives you the Friends cantrip, but without the downside. So it gives you advantage on all charisma checks directed at humanoids. However, with one small downside, and the fact that it only works on humanoids of challenge rating 1 or lower, which is still a lot better than the Friends cantrip, which makes you hostile towards the target after the effect ends. And what do you know, the commoner stat block is considered a CR0 creature, which means the perfume will give you advantage in basically all social situations inside a town, city, or small village. If you run into people who aren't active combatants, there's a good chance the perfume will just give you advantage on social encounters with them. Even nobles are considered a CR1/8 creature, so it works on important people as well, unless there's secretly a big bad guy who's a high CR rating. And the perfume even has an extra little caveat to the end of it, where creatures who are subject to the perfume's effects are not aware that they've been influenced by magic. So there's literally no downsides to it at all. It's just an incredibly useful common item, unless you're in a campaign which literally has 0 interactions with people inside towns, or you have a DM who doesn't allow you to barter with their shopkeepers or something. And at number 6, we have the Hat of Wizardry from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is a common magical hat which can only be attuned to by wizards, and has 2 effects. One of them allows you to use the hat as a spellcasting focus for wizard spells, and the second one allows you to cast any wizard cantrip, assuming you pass a DC 10 Arcana check. Now, a DC 10 Arcana check is considered a medium level check, and should be made a lot easier by wizards who want to have high intelligence anyway, which increases their chance to succeed that Arcana check. And this just allows you to have more versatility with your cantrips, as you can take all the useful ones you want, and then once per day have access to one that you might need at that moment. And some useful wizard cantrips include Control Flames for light and the option to attack with it, Create Bonfire for cooking or the option to attack with it, Dancing Lights / light if you need a flashlight only, Mending if you need to fix something in an emergency, Mold Earth if you need a quick shovel, or Prestidigitation if you just need anything else, as that's a very versatile spell that can do any minor magical effect basically. So there's a lot of nice utility spells that you might want to only use once per day, and did not want to use one of your cantrip spots in order to have access to it. Although, it also has the really nice other feature, where it counts as your spellcasting focus, which allows you to free up a hand for material components. Normally, if you cast a spell that's a material component, which a lot of spells do have, you need to have a free hand in order to hold your spellcasting focus, which doesn't allow a lot of melee fighters to hold two-handed weapons, because then they come into the problem of how do they store the spellcasting focus when they want to use their weapon with 2 hands, or 2-weapon fighting. But with the Hat of Wizardry, your hands are free, which allows you to use your hands for weapons no problem. Although, there's only one subclass of wizard that uses weapons, the Bladesinger, so it's not that useful on other classes that like to cast spells and attack in melee, unless you multi-class into wizard in order to qualify to use this item. But, if you want to free a hand for a spellcasting focus, and can't take the warcasting feat for some reason, the Hat of Wizardry is an option in order to free up your hand. Although if all you care about is freeing up your hand for a spellcasting focus, then the Ruby of the War Mage might be better, since it can be attuned to by any spellcaster and is also a common magic item, and allows you to attach a ruby to a weapon in order to turn that weapon into a spellcasting focus. Although once per day, being able to cast any wizard cantrip is still pretty good as well, so both of its effects are good, which is why it makes this list over the Ruby of the War Mage. And at number 5, we have the Clockwork Amulet from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This is an item that allows you to once per day completely ignore rolling for an attack, and instead treat it as if you rolled a 10 for that attack roll before adding the modifiers. Now, the average roll of the d20 for an attack roll is 10.5, so the Clockwork Amulet technically gives you slightly less than the average roll when using it. However, there are situations in which this is actually incredibly useful. With high enough modifiers, like a +7 or something, getting a guaranteed 10 would give you a 17 on the attack roll. And if you've already determined the AC of the target, or you just know it has low AC because of something else, then it's basically a guaranteed hit. And there's lots of instances in which you'd want a guaranteed hit. Like maybe a target is running away at low health, and you know they have less than 17 AC. There would be no chance for them to actually get away if you rolled low. Or if you have some kind of special ammunition that you want to hit, and you're rolling a 10 or higher would allow you to hit that target. Or you just feel like you're unlucky, and you want one of your attacks to actually hit in an encounter. There's lots of situations in which you'd want to willingly take a 10 on the d20 roll. So many that this item is actually considered too powerful to be a common magic item, especially one which doesn't require attunement. The only restriction is you can only use it once per day. So once per day, you basically get an automatic hit if they have a low enough AC, which is really good for a common magic item, and why it easily takes a higher spot on this list, only being out by 4 slightly more overpowered common magic items. And at number 4, we have the Imbued Wood Focus from Eberron. This is an item that can come in the form of a rod, staff, or wand, and basically has the effect to be treated as a spellcasting focus, and can provide a +1 damage boost to a certain type of spell damage, as determined by the type of wood used for the item. So basically like the Orb of Shielding, where the type of material used for the item determines which type of damage it interacts with. So if it's made of Fernian ash, it will increase your fire damage, and etc, etc. Exactly like the Orb of Shielding, where there is even ones that increase your acid or poison, and ones that increase your lightning or thunder. Now, it only gives a +1 damage to a single damage dice. So if you're 5th level caster using Firebolt, which deals 2d10 fire damage, it would only give you a single extra point of fire damage. But if you're using a Fireball, it would only give you 1 extra damage to that 8d6 roll. But since you only roll the damage 1 time for all targets hit, it would add an extra point of damage to everything caught in its blast radius, since it doesn't specify that it only works on attacks or with an attack roll, or that it has a limit on the number of targets with that 1 damage dice. Which means if you have an item made with Shavara Birchwood, which only affects force damage, then if you used a magic missile, it would apply that 1 extra damage to all the missiles. Since, based on rules as written, you only roll for damage a single time with magic missiles, and then apply that 1 damage roll to all missile targets. And what makes this item so good is that it's incredibly rare for magic items to actually increase the damage of spells at all. Even the Wands of the War Mage, which are basically the spellcaster versions of +1 weapons, don't actually increase the damage of spells, and only increase their chance to hit. So being able to affect spell damage at all is incredibly rare, and you get this +1 damage from a common item, which makes it amazing. Although, it is only 1 damage, and to only 1 type of elemental damage, so you have to really hyper-focus on one spell that you want to give the buff to. But that's still really good for a common magic item, which is why it takes a high spot on this list. And at number 3, we have the Spellwrought Tattoo from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. More specifically, the 1st level version of it, as this is a tattoo which contains a 1st level spell, that you then apply to your skin and can use whenever you want, without using the spell material components. Now technically, a 1st level spell scroll is also common quality, but the Spellwrought Tattoo has a lot of advantages over a spell scroll. For one, a spell scroll can only be used by a class which knows or can learn the spell in that spell scroll. So if you have a spell scroll for Eldritch Blast, for example, a spell that can only be learned by warlocks, and you're a sorcerer or wizard, then you can't use that spell scroll. And if you can use that class, and the spell you're trying to cast from that spell scroll is a higher level than one you're able to cast, then you have to succeed in ability check in order to successfully cast the spell. So, it's kind of cumbersome to use a spell scroll correctly, and basically only spellcasters can use them. The Spellwrought Tattoo kind of ignores all of that. Anyone can have the tattoo, and anyone can use the spell from the tattoo. When you use this spell, the tattoo then vanishes from your skin, so it's a one-time use. And the spell you use has a set saving throw DC of 13 and a +5 bonus to its attack roll, if it requires one. The exact same modifiers that a 1st level spell scroll would have. So basically, the tattoo is just a better spell scroll, and one that doesn't require you to reach into your bags in order to pull out the correct spell scroll in order to use that spell. So if you have the spell Shield attached to the tattoo, if you're in the middle of combat, you'll just be able to use a reaction to cast that spell like normal, without needing to have a spell scroll in hand. Now, the best spell you could probably have with one of these tattoos would be Find Familiar, since it summons a pet that doesn't have a duration, and basically just lasts as long as it lives. And the Familiar gives you a whole bunch of benefits in combat, as well as being an excellent scouting tool, and is one of the top choices of spells chosen when people take the Spell Initiate feat. And if you can only cast a spell a single time, that's kind of the best one to grab. Alternatively, there's a lot of other really good 1st level spells, like Shield or Absorb Elements for emergencies, Healing Word or Good Berry for healing, or Magic Missiles / Burning Hands for damage. If you want to give a damaging option to a companion or just a really low CR friendly creature, like a commoner, this could allow you to give them a really good spell to cast in combat. And if you have some way to make multiples of these tattoos, it's a really good option to just give, like, everyone in your party one spell. Or if you're the DM, this could be a way to give low CR creatures one-time use spells, and that players wouldn't be able to loot from corpses afterwards, like they would be able to if you gave them a Wand of Magic Missiles, for example. Instead, just give them a Spellwrought Tattoo of Magic Missiles, and it accomplishes the same thing, since they'll probably only be able to cast it one time before they die anyway. So it's useful for players, but also an excellent tool for DMs to use in my opinion, especially since it's common quality. It shouldn't be that crazy to throw it on a handful of low CR monsters, depending on the setting of your world of course, whereas you can't really do the same thing with a spell scroll since they're so limiting in how and who can use them. And at number 2, we have the Masquerade Tattoo, another item from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Now, unlike the Spellwrought Tattoo, this tattoo is not a one-time use consumable item, and does allow you to transfer the tattoo to someone else, as Tasha's Cauldron of Everything introduced a couple of tattoo items, which require attunement by applying the tattoo like normal, but then when you end your attunement to the tattoo, it actually turns back into the needle, which you can then give to someone else, or loot from a corpse of someone who had the tattoo applied. And what the Masquerade Tattoo does is twofold. One of them is the ability to change the shape of the tattoo into any color or pattern, or any shape or size on your body, with the only limitation that it can't be smaller than a copper piece, but it can be as big as covering your entire body. And its other ability allows you to cast the Disguise Self spell once per day. And Disguise Self is actually a pretty useful spell to have, as it basically casts an illusion over yourself that allows you to look like someone else. Just as long as you don't go crazy and try to make yourself look like a gigantic dragon or something. And the disguise can only be seen through if a creature uses their action to investigate, in which case they need to roll higher than a 13 to see that it's an illusion. And there's lots of social situations in which you'd want to transform yourself into something else, like running away from a guard in a city, or a criminal syndicate, or for going out and getting information without raising suspicion. Disguise Self is useful, especially since it lasts for a full hour, and you basically only use it once per day if you took it as a normal spell slot anyway. It's not really a spell that you want to cast multiple times a day, and is generally something you only use once in a while. Plus, its other effect can change the tattoo into whatever you want. Can kinda be useful as a disguise as well. You could just have that tattoo cover your entire face if you're going out looking for information, and then just change the tattoo to something more innocuous later on. That way you don't raise as much suspicion. Or you can just have the tattoo cover your entire body and just make yourself bright green, if you really want to stand out in the middle of a crowd to sound a signal to the rest of your party or something. Both of the effects have situational uses, but being able to cast Disguise Self once per day is definitely the best part of the tattoo. And a common magic item giving you access to a first level spell once per day is really good, as seen by the previous spot which only gave you a first level spell one time total. That's kind of why the Masquerade Tattoo takes a little higher spot. It's one of the only items that allows you to cast a leveled spell more than once, and it's actually a useful spell too. And before we go to number 1, let's go over a few honorable mentions, just because there's so many useful common items, and I don't know if I'll make another video on this topic. First, we have the Moontouch Sword, which I'm sure a lot of people thought would be on this list since it's the only magic item sword you can get that's common quality, which also counts as a magic item for getting over the creature's resistances to slashing damage. It also functions like a flashlight in darkness, which is neat, but it's probably the only useful weapon that's of common quality. And there's also 2 pieces of ammunition, the Unbreakable Arrow and the Walloping Ammunition. The Unbreakable Arrow just simply can't be broken except with an anti-magic shield. Now, this could be situationally useful to throw into the middle of a giant machinery in order to clog up the gears, or just use it to lock a door or something, even though its intended use is just to always have arrows to recover at the end of battle. However, since it's a magic item, it's assumed that you only have the one arrow, and having a singular unbreakable arrow isn't that big of a deal when it comes to recovering your arrows at the end of a fight. It's a lot better if you have 20 of them. That way you never have to worry about your arrows breaking ever again over the course of a regular adventuring day. And the Walloping Ammunition is a type of ammunition that has an extra effect, where a creature hit by the ammunition has a chance to be knocked prone if they fail a DC 10 strength saving throw. It's a kind of easy saving throw for a lot of monsters to beat, But having a chance to knock a target prone on a ranged attack is very helpful for shooting flying creatures out of the sky. But it has the same downsides as the Unbreakable Arrow, where, since it's a magic item, it's assumed you only have one walloping ammunition, and it's not very useful if you only have one piece of ammo. If you had 20 of them, then it's a lot more useful, as it basically gives all your shots a chance to knock a target prone. The Moontouch Sword didn't make this list, since the only reason it's chosen is because it's technically a magic weapon, which is useful, but I kind of want to talk about the effects of the items rather than having a technically magic weapon that allows you to bypass resistances. And the ammunitions are only useful when you have multiples of them, and aren't useful if you only have a single one. And now, let's get into number 1. The number 1 is the Potion of Healing, the only item on this list from the regular Dungeon Master's Handbook. The potion is very simple. As an action, you can drink the potion in order to heal for 2d4 plus 2 hit points. And this item is probably one of the most useful magic items in the game, and appears in basically every single campaign of D&D. You'd be hard-pressed not to find at least one Potion of Healing in an adventure, and there's a good chance everyone has used the Potion of Healing at least once as well. Having an on-demand healing is just incredibly valuable in a whole bunch of situations, and the lowest version of this healing just happens to be common quality, even if it is technically a consumable and can only be used once. And funny enough, even though there are other quantities of healing potions, even at higher levels, people will still be carrying around the regular old common quality healing potion, because the baseline healing potion provides is good enough, and if you just need a little bit of healing to come back to battle or something, then you don't really need a higher amount of healing. If a party doesn't have a healer, you could just give them a sack full of healing potions and they'd be good to go. It's a great tool as a DM in order to just let parties pick whatever they want for their party makeup, rather than forcing one person to have to pick healing spells if they don't want to. Because a sack of like 10 healing potions is probably more useful than a healer anyway during early tiers of play, and there's very few magic items that can even heal, and mainly because the potions of healing are more than good enough to kind of fill that niche. So for being one of the most useful items in the game period, the good old Potion of Healing easily takes number 1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other common magic items which are way better than the ones in this video that I may have missed? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one.